Now, just to recap, I've basically covered most of the generalities surrounding sedevacantism and Old Catholicism. But now I'm going to get more specifically into the subject of Jansenism, which is a viewpoint that of theology that I personally believe in, and how it contrasts with what's taught in Roman Catholic churches today. Most Roman Catholic churches, most of the dioceses within the church itself, have taught a mishmash of grace theology and works theology. Essentially, the two have been sort of combined together, and you get a lot of contradictory views regarding what constitutes salvation. And thus we come up with the ridiculous notions of buying your way into heaven through indulgences, the idea that certain saints who have done such extraordinary things can, sort of cash in their miracles and then sort of redeposit them with the souls who are less in line with God's law, the Ten Commandments, in order to buy their way into heaven, and a bunch of other really ridiculous stuff that really is only surpassed by some of the things that are written in the Quran. But all of this stems from a viewpoint that the works of men, independent of their faith, have a level of bearing on their salvation. And this was something that was taught by the 5th century heretic Pelagius. And thus we can arrive at the conclusion that the Roman Catholic Church is semi-Pelagian by nature. Semi-Pelagian in the sense that they don't discount grace, but they put works on an equal footing with grace, and they furthermore teach things such as baptism by desire, which states that one does not have to really know Jesus Christ, they just have to be looking for him. And how we determine what constitutes looking for Christ is something that they tend to come up with on a case-by-case basis, and there's no real standard for determining it that's anywhere found in Scripture or held up anywhere in the early traditions of the Church or even the Middle Age traditions of the Church. This whole idea of baptism by desire is a very new phenomenon. But the question then arises, was the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman diocese in particular, always this way, or was this something that came about a bit later? Because obviously I would state that this is something that was not part of the original church, and that I would argue that the Roman diocese was part of the original church. So naturally this is something that must have been imported into the church, and the question was, when was it imported? Well, Pelagius was excommunicated in the 5th century, and I have a link to the Wikipedia page regarding Pelagius if you want to do further readings on him. And I've also provided a link to St. Augustine, who was the person who was responsible for defeating his heresy. But an interesting thing to note was that the bishop of the Roman diocese, through part of the Pelagian controversy, actually sided with Pelagius at first. And this is really the first indication that we get of any kind of a Pelagian tendency within the Roman Catholic Church. But it doesn't really start to bear fruit until a good bit later, probably around the 14th or 15th century at the height of the medieval era. But suffice to say, somewhere between the excommunication of Pelagius and the latter part of the Middle Ages, the church becomes semi-Pelagian. And this eventually leads to the Protestant Reformation. There were many people who preceded the Protestant Reformation who were very influential in it, one of them being Cornelius Jansen, who was the person who influenced the Jansenist order and was ultimately responsible for what later became the Old Catholic Church. But others included figures such as John Wycliffe, John Huss, and eventually Martin Luther. And the objections of all of these figures were the same. It was that too much power was being centralized in Rome, this was leading to something bad, and that the theology of the church was slipping into heresy. And on this matter, I agree with Martin Luther. I disagree with Martin Luther on some other things, specifically some theological conclusions that actually, I should really rephrase that and say that I disagree with the Lutheran Church, because it wasn't actually Martin Luther that came up with most of the things that I disagree with in regards to Lutheran liturgy. Martin Luther himself was a solid Augustinian theologian, and he was until his death, and the church that he founded was modeled on those standards. It wasn't until after his death that the problems that the Lutheran Church has currently started to develop. But essentially, Martin Luther began what was a period of soul searching within the Catholic Church. And the Jansenists, although they didn't really want to break with the Roman diocese at the time, they probably saw eye to eye with a lot of Luther's and later Calvin's objections regarding the direction that the church was going in. But they decided, the Jansenists decided to carry this fight on within the current hierarchy of the church, rather than break away and try to rebuild the church from the ground up the way the magistrate Protestant reformers tried to.